map shows. So it's pretty remarkable.
Gotcha.
I like the honeycomb.
Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all. Welcome back. Not quite a large group as last time, but that's all right. Pietro and I decided to shift the dates a little bit, just because I think a weekly tasting is logistically can be a little a little difficult, given what we're all dealing with on a daily basis. So thank you all for sticking with us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Sangiovese is, I believe, in 2 weeks, and then following that, another 2 weeks will be Sagrantino. I think I have that right. You're right.
Yeah, we'll solidify the dates shortly here.
Sure. But we'll give you guys plenty of lead time. I've got some great wines right now in house, and I'm going to find a beautiful Chianti from Castellina and Chianti, a really nice producer. And we're going to have a lot of fun with Sangiovese, so we'll gear up on that. Anybody have any rosé stories or memories of rosé that struck them in their lives before we get started? Anything that speaks to you?
I have a request.
Yes. What's up?
For the next one, can you send out the food pairing recommendations earlier?
Sure.
That'd be amazing. That way I can actually plan what.
Absolutely, Dana.
Thank you.
That's a good idea.
All right. How's 3 days early? That sounds great.
Sorry, I'm trying to mute us so we don't disturb you. But yeah, that's great. That'd be amazing.
All right. I will send an email out 3 days before.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much for that request. I love it. And I'll keep that in mind too. I'll try and come up with a whole dish if I can. I work with an Italian chef by the name of Alessandro Campitelli, a Roman chef who's here, who's doing private meals and delivering them into your homes and such. I'll reach out to him and see if he's got some ideas. If he had any interest in, I think he probably does have an interest, but if he put together kind of a dinner, would anyone be interested in receiving a dinner pairing with this? Raise your hand if you are.
Definitely.
All right, Dana, we've got you.
Probably,
Mary. All right, no worries.
Like that?
I just want to get a feeling, see how it is. We might put together something with Sangiovese.
One of the other.
Would that be good?
Yeah, you might have a little party here.
Yeah, it may be more antipasti first course driven. It might not be a full whole meal. But anyway, all right. So good request, Dana. Any memories of rosé? Come on, there's got to be one out there. I have one from Morocco, but I don't want to take up the airspace here.
Oh. I think the first rosé that I decided I liked and I told you about it was I was at what is that restaurant in San Francisco? She has 3 stars, but Petit Crane.
Petit Crane, yeah, I'll tell you.
Petit Crane, and we ordered I think my friend wanted a rosé, and I'm kind of like, it wasn't a big rosé, and it was that Sicilian rosé. I think I told you about it.
I believe it could have been from
I've forgotten the guy's name.
Mount Etna or Vittoria?
It was Etna.
Etna?
I really, really, really enjoyed that. I was like, wow.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's anywhere on the island. They make rosé kind of everywhere, but
yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Etna rosé is some of my most fun. My most pleasurable experience drinking rosé is from Mount Etna. I actually tried to get one for this tasting, one from a producer by the name of Calabretta, but I couldn't get my hands on it. So we're in Campania, in Apulia, and of course, Lake County with this tasting. Any other thoughts on rosé?
A rosé story, which is. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
So I sort of I love rosé myself, but I think I do have that
feeling that some people do that it's looked down upon. And so I work with a publisher, and we do a lot of culinary cookbooks.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I think the audio is slurring a little bit. It's a little hard to hear.
And so we were having a leave it. I don't know if everybody knows Jacques Pepin connection. I'll save it for another time.
Oh, no, it's just a little hard to hear you guys. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We're in the backyard, so I think the sound is getting absorbed. But
I can hear you now.
Say that I thought for sure we were serving him lunch, or I was there at the lunch, and I just happened to be standing by the wine. And Jacques said, "Oh, could I have some wine?" And I thought for sure he'd want a red. And he said, "No, the rosé." And I just felt so affirmed. And from then on, whenever rosé, I just tell them that I actually poured a glass for Jacques Pepin, and that they can never say rosé again.
Where did that happen?
Actually, right here at Market Hall, we did a book signing with a title that he had that came out 2018.
Awesome.
And it was really fantastic. He's a sweetheart, and it was really fun.
Oh, I love it. Good story.
And
A good story. Anyone else?
So I have a couple.
Yes.
Two. My first memory of appreciating rosé, I was living in San Luis Obispo, and we were in Central Coast, and friends came from San Diego to come visit and wanted to have rosé and have a little picnic. So we picked up some strawberries and some other stuff and just sat at a picnic table. I couldn't tell you what varietal it was, but it was a warm day, and it was so refreshing to have with strawberries and just hang out outdoors and enjoy. So I was really turned on to rosés. That was probably in 2000, or 2001, so about 20 years ago. And then the other one is just from this last weekend. I was with friends, social distance, visiting for a brunch, and we had a bottle of champagne or sparkling wine from Mount Vesuvius. And it was rosé champagne, and it was so amazing. We'd been saving it. We had a beautiful little brunch, all kinds of sweet and savory flavors, and an amazing little bottle of champagne.
It was a rosé?
It was a rosé.
Wow, that's beautiful. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Sparkling
Awesome.
rosé from Mount Vesuvius.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty dangerous.
Yeah, that's special.
Two ladies drinking it. It was awesome.
I'm loving these stories. It's funny. I think there are wines that you can talk about where what's in the glass just kind of is what captures you. And for some reason, rosé, and I also consider this with some sparkles. It is kind of attached to a memory or a place. I mean, when I drink a good rosé, for me, my first rosé that kind of made me, I was drinking it and went, "Whoa, what's that?" My first rosé was funny. It wasn't Morocco. It was Tunisia, in this little city outside the main, or this little neighborhood outside the main city, called Sidi Bou Said, and it's a blue city. And I drank a rosé from there that I just didn't expect. This was before I was a sommelier, so this was pre-som. So this was Paul, busy manager. It took my breath away. It was gorgeous. And so that was my first experience with the rosé. But I often find that when I've tasted rosé that I've experienced in Italy and in France here, the experience is not quite the same. I really think it has to do with being proximity to sun, and then but also a memory, something that moves you. So I like rosé. It captures memory. It's an uncomplicated wine. There are a few that do make it complicated, but I think it's an uncomplicated wine that captures memory and the weather in a nice way. So that's my little duet with rosé. Any opening thoughts, Pietro?
Yeah,
Do you enjoy making rosé?
I'm sorry?
Do you enjoy making rosé?
I do, actually. We're not really set up to do a lot of high-tech white wine making, but rosé is sturdy enough on one hand that for our rustic methods, it actually actually turns out pretty well. Our current club release is actually 3 different rosés. One light one, a medium red with a little bit of blending, and then the darker one, which we have here. And I found it really nuanced and always kind of interesting and surprising. I feel like I learned something about the grapes we're using, like a new face or a disposition to them that I wasn't aware of before. Every time I make one.
I like that.
So yeah, I actually do. I do enjoy it, and sometimes they're surprising. Sometimes they're frustrating. Sometimes rosés, at least for me, with the grapes we're using, they change a lot. And sometimes, like 6 months after bottling, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a home run. This is perfect. And then it keeps kind of migrating somewhere else, or it'll come into focus all of a sudden in the bottle in a really beautiful way. So they're kind of like a really interesting moving target to me.
What's the most finicky grape? It does that
Yeah.
oscillates in color and changes a little bit in character.
Out of the current ones, I've been using Early Harvest Primitivo for the light one.
Early Harvest Primitivo.
Yeah, I have a block of Primitivo, very small, that just because of virus and things like that, it won't ripen for red wine anymore. So I've been using it for white, and it actually produces a really saline, minerally, almost salty, lightly colored, peach-scented white or rosé. That's almost, it's almost like Pinot Gris color. It's just that's been really fascinating, though. I feel like it's given me some background with Zinfandel winemaking also by being able to do that. I feel like I understand the grape a little differently.
Wow.
Higher acid form. So I'm excited to try the Maffini.
The Maffini, yeah.
That's
Agliano.
That looks to be early pick.
Not a lot of information on Maffini.
That's this one.
It's a duo. It's Luigi and Raffaella, which is Luigi and Raffaella, which started their winery. I actually don't even know what year they started, but they farmed 2 vineyards in an area called Cilento, which is just south of Salento, on its way to this national park, so kind of on the edges of the national park, and of course the Turanian Mediterranean. But I think they've got a very kind of restrained style to it. It's very clean, kind of clipped, bright wine. And as it gets a little closer to room temperature, I think a lot of the volcanic soils, and a lot of calcareous and volcanic and that so on and so forth, but really comes out, I think, in that wine. Certainly different from the Produttore di Manduria, which is like a lipstick head.
Yeah.
Kind of a punch in the face.
Which you can do with rosés. That's what's so fascinating about it. Picking time and the way the grapes come in really does a lot to determine what you get out of the rosé, but it also shapes. You can do late harvest rosés at 15% alcohol that are lipsticky, bubblegum, super bright California or Italian,
right.
Without a whole lot of depth. Or you can swing the opposite way and kind of do something super lean and racy and maybe not quite so gluttonous.
Yeah.
And they're all valid. They're all realistic choices you can make.
I believe that super lean style in Italy is called Chiaretto. Or it's a very kind of clean, kind of almost entirely off the skins kind of style.
Yeah, and Italy has a really broad selection of rosés. The styles are more so than France, I think.
Really, you think so? All right, styles, yeah, I believe so. Styles, yes.
As far as just the regional patchwork of the stylistic, what this village does and that village does 5 miles away.
Yeah,
pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think of
France may have a longer history, but
I think of French rosé, and I think what the kind of the main areas in France is really not the birthplace of rosé. I don't think you can really claim birthright to rosé. You know, I think it's just kind of a winemaking method, and I think it was probably extracted from winemaking as a way to drink wine younger and earlier. But certainly, I think that, you know, if there was to be a birthplace claimed, I like to look at the areas that exclusively make rosé, and in the southern Rhone here, you've got the area of Tavel down in just kind of to the west of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And Tavel you know, that's an area that only makes rosé. But, you know, French-wise, Pietro, you know, I think of like the clean and fresh Cabernet Franc and Gamay Noir and maybe a little peppery Pinot Denis driven rosés from the Loire Valley. And then I think of Provence and the Languedoc-Roussillon down in the south here. And those as being kind of like the big rosé areas. And they vary in style. I'm not quite sure where I was going with that. Maybe I just wanted to show you the map. but you know, they vary in style, and I think they can get really interesting in France. But really just like that kind of fresh Loire style, or that pale pink and super herbaceous, not quite so herbaceous, maybe more fresh flowers and dried herbs and things like that, and lavender and the herbs de Provence. Not quite so green herbaceous. I meant more herbs. And then you get the really deep and heavy and firm, full style, almost saignée from Tavel. But that's it in France. In Italy, you're right. I could name like 5 different styles right off the top of my head. Etna to Piemonte to Veneto to, yeah. Did you know, Pietro, that there is a rosé event, an annual rosé event where the Apugliese celebrate all 20 varietals of rosé that they produce?
No.
There is. It's called Puglia and Rosé. It's an annual event. It's in conjunction with the Specialty Food Show in New York. I just discovered that. So anyway, there's a whole event around rosés. So any of you that diehard rosé lovers, we'll send you the report back to us.
Now's a good time to be a good diehard rosé lover, because the world is your oyster in a way it hasn't been before, rosé-wise.
There's a lot out there.
Yeah.
Pietro and I have worked for the same outfit here in Berkeley, or north of me in Berkeley. It's called Vintage Berkeley, and it's 3 stores. 2 of them are named Vintage Berkeley at different locations, and the one's called Solano Cellars. And the one that he and I worked for the same store at different times, just crossing over, which is how we met. And they have a cart that's in the front of the store, and it's packed with rosé. And the guy who runs the shop has he like gets upset with himself when his rosés he thinks are boring. So he probably has 20 different labels. And yeah, stuff from Hungary, stuff from northern Spain, stuff from the United States, New Zealand. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Shall we get started? Yeah. All right. So as usual, this is just a discussion, but Pietro and I are going to do a little bit of presenting in the beginning. Not so much the history of rosé, but I think prominent places in the world where it plays. I'll talk a little bit about the old world, and Pietro will talk a little bit about the new world. And then we'll dig into what's in the glass and start figuring out what we've got and how it you know, kind of how it lays out against one another, side by side. And also dig into what other areas in southern Italy, the Mezzogiorno, as they call it, Basilicata, Calabria, Sicilia, Sardinia, Campania, Lazio. Lazio is a little bit more central, but they're also, I suppose, they're considered Mezzogiorno as well. And did I miss any? I think I got them all. Apulia, I think it's the one I missed. Those are all the Mezzogiorno. Is that?
It is. I'm blanking on it. Is it Molise?
Molise, yeah, you know, I always find Molise is supposed to, are always Molise Centrale.
Yeah.
Along with Tuscany, Umbria. What kind of Lazio gets wrapped up in there as well?
Yeah.
Lazio, Umbria. But
I
I
don't
always
see much
Lazio
in that
is,
area though.
I don't know anything about Molise. I know what I should, but I haven't tasted their wines in a long time. But that's the Mezzogiorno, and you do have a lot of different rosés coming from Sicilia, a little bit from Sardinia, and then of course we're going to talk about Campania and Apulia, kind of being the place where I think that makes the most rosé in Italy, covering around 40% of total rosé production coming from Italy. Comes from Apulia. I think so, around that, yeah. Anyway, hey Pedro, do you want to start off with the New World? I know it's a little backwards, but I started off last time, and I've already been talking way too much.
What should I say about the New World? If we're talking about California, microcosm, there are a lot of different rosés coming out of California. And I think it's actually a good way to kind of get a glimpse into climate and geology and terroir and all of that across the state. Not surprisingly, you can find very amped up Cabernet based rosés from Napa and Sonoma. You can find really beautiful, more minerally and maybe old world inflected Pinot rosés from cooler climate places. You can find full throttle Paso rosé. And I think they're all pretty interesting. The one thing that's kind of just worth mentioning from the winemaking perspective is there are pretty much two different ways you can make rosés. Actually, there are three. In France and some other areas, you can make a pink by taking white wine and adding a splash of red to it, which is a fully legal and approved way to do it in some areas, which has really interesting results, especially in some champagnes. But the two options we really have to us is either the saignée method, where we sort of pick for a red wine and then bleed some of the juice off before it has time to have a lot of skin contact, and then you ferment that. Or you can pick something generally earlier and put it directly into the press it like you would a white wine, but it picks up a little bit of color along the way, and that's generally how you get the really pale, pretty onion skin sort of, those French styles are often that way, although Tabella is different. And they yield different things. The saignée method tends to be more fruit forward. You have riper grapes that you're working with, so you get more of those mature red fruits and some interesting spice things. Whereas if you're harvesting early and then pressing directly, you tend to get a more maybe earthy, minerally, more restrained fruit, but more of that subtle, like peach, apricot, pepper, some of those notes, and not so much like the bright red cherry kind of thing. And the way people choose, when they choose to pick and what they choose to do at that point is sort of an important crossing point. I like the direct press method with lean grapes because I feel you get more body from it. You get all that sort of gelatinous stuff that's inside the grape skin. Yeah, and that kind of translates through the wine. So you can make kind of a more tense thing where you have higher acidity, but you have a little more body and a little more flesh that kind of rounds it out. But that being said, the Prima Materia Rosé is all saignée. So different than the very pale one that I did. Just different. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. They're just different styles. Yeah.
The majority is skin contact. If you were to kind of buy a rosé from every region of the world and taste them all, you're mostly going to come across skin contact.
Yeah, definitely. It's more of a headache to pick something early and press it and go through the whole thing. Whereas, I mean, in California, I mean, just for the sake of clarity, one of the it's not a dirty trick, but it's a typical winemaking thing to do is if you pick really ripe grapes, you have to add water back to bring the alcohol down, which is legal. It's something we try to avoid, but a lot of producers, it's just standard protocol. So you bleed off some of that juice and then add water back to replace it to bring the alcohol back down to a reasonable level. And there's a lot of rosé out there it's pretty tasty for being, you know, something that might not be the most pure intent wise. You can still get a really great rosé out of that. There's lots of Cabernet rosé floating around that, you know, tanks and tanks of it, that's exactly how it was made and why it was made.
Yeah.
It still is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating for that. But I do tend to like the cooler climate, like something like Etna rosés, where you have, you know, sun-drenched fruit, but you have this intense mineral and acidity, and you have the altitude and these shifts in temperature. Like that's where the rosé really gets fascinating to me.
Yeah, I agree. I've also had rosés from Novara in northern Piemonte. On your way to Alto Piemonte, Novara, and a little town north of that called Gattinara, and the Colli Novarese, and that's a special area for Nebbiolo. But I've had some rosé that's been really beautiful, and you start to see some of the blending grapes from that area, like Vespolina and Uvarara, show a little bit more in the blend, and Nebbiolo sometimes backs off to Barbera and maybe Fresia from Langhe and stuff like that. Those are some of my favorites. Cool. Yeah, I appreciate a good Alpine rosé. Although I cannot deny Tavel. And maybe I'll jump in a little bit and talk just a little bit about Tavel. And we're in the southern part of the Rhone Valley of France. And you know, when I look back to kind of historical stuff, there's a couple of sources that I go directly to. But just as a sommelier, grasping in the great wide world of wine and trying to find something to hold on to in order to build an understanding. Because the world of wine is so vast, you have to start somewhere. For me, it's either a person's story or the story of a town. And basically, when it comes down to historical relevance. Certainly when we were talking about Barbera 2 weeks ago, it really was about the castle in Monferrato, in those documents dating back to the 1400s. And here, with rosé, is the town of Tavel in southern Rhone, west of Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Lyon, those areas. And Tavel is 100% rosé production. That's what they do. And I love that. Or mostly rosé production. I haven't looked at the AOC in a long time. But that area, they deal exclusively in those kind of southern Rhone grapes. So you're going to see Grenache, Mourvedre, Claret, Bourboulec, and a lot of others. There's a number that's well over 16 or so in that area. Certainly being blended into Châteauneuf, but here in Tavel, no more than any of those grapes on their own cannot be any more than 60% of the blend. So it's always going to be a blend of grapes from that area, a blend of different expressions, showcasing kind of a full, complete picture. Tavel's got an extraordinary history. It was founded in the 5th century by Greeks, and first vineyards were planted during that area as well. Tavel, when it comes to winemaking, there's a little bit of information. Pope Innocent IV in the 1730s declared Tavel to be what they call a CDR, or a place of quality wine, among the very first in that area. But when it comes to the true history of Tavel, it's really about the winemakers. And they have a very special relationship to, kind of the French AOC, which is their governing organization when it comes to how they govern quality of wine in France, the Appellation Origine Contrôlée. And in Italy, it's the DOC, Denominazione Origine Contrôlée, Controllata, excuse me. But in France, in Tavel, 1902 was around the first time in that area where local winemakers started to band together and create a governing body for themselves, pointing out the proper vineyards, the most historic vineyards, firming up the quality of winemaking in order to bring kind of a nice base level across the whole region in order to raise the fortunes for all. And in 1927, 40 of those winemakers petitioned the government in Lyon to be recognized, to have these regulations that they'd spent years creating to be recognized. And in not too long afterwards, a little over 10 years, in 1937, exactly 10 years away, the AOC was created. The first governing body was created, and they used a lot of the model from Tavel. So this idea that local winemakers getting together and saying, this is what we make and this is how we make it. These stories followed all across France and Champagne to the Côte d'Or and Burgundy and down in the south. But in Tavel, I think it's especially important because it predates the AOC and predates the government having any influence at all. And I like to think that a lot of the founding principles of the AOC, when it was established in the 30s, looked to Tavel, their neighbors, to see what they were doing. And so it's impressive to be sure. And that's, I could talk a little bit about more Tavel. It's got 4 zones and they're all kind of uniquely soil based. And as you get down into the area of southern France, certainly Rhone Valley is considered southern France, but between the Rhone Valley and Provence, you've got the hot Alps. And so you've got some territory in between. But the land lays out a little bit more sinuously. It's more rolling hills and you're much closer to the water. So you've got a lot of different soil deposit areas from alluvial to Maurianic as you get up higher. And Tavel's a really special place. If you're interested in drinking rosé from Tavel, there's a producer that I love by the name of Chateau Manissy, Manissy. And I think it's a good expression, a full-throated expression of Tavel Rosé, which is full-throated. It's full-bodied and structured and awesome. So I would recommend you checking out Manissy. It's going to be the fullest rosé you've ever had. You get a steak with it. Or if you're a vegetarian, lots of heavy roasted root vegetables and things. But it'll be a really nice experience. Yeah, in southern Italy, it's hard to trace anything in southern Italy because everything goes back to the Romans anyway. But when it comes to rosé, I think Apulia pretty much stands on its own as being kind of the heart of rosé in southern Italy. Although it does play in probably in every region. I'm sure every region makes a rosé. The laws in Italy, the DOC is good, but also can be very troubling because they allow a glut of styles for every region. So every region and sub-appellation and MGA, so to speak, can make everything from sparkling to rosé to red to sweet. And that's just kind of allowed for every area. And that can get a little bit difficult in Italy because you start to just see a lot of product and a lot of stuff perhaps not made quite in the best way. So it's can be a little tough to find a quality rosé. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more. I'm done talking history, so to speak. But look to Tavel, most important spot, I would say, when it comes to rosé and the history of that kind of method. Last thing I'll say quickly is, Pietro talks about the saignée method of producing rosé, and I will say that for the most part, if a producer makes rosé, it's grapes from vineyards that are already established to produce wine in their portfolio. But I think when you get to the Champagne region of France and you get to sparkling rosé nowadays, not so much in the back in the day where it was mostly reserved for the houses, but nowadays I think Champagne Rosé is one of the most exciting aspects to Champagne right now. One of the rising categories, and producers like L'Armandier Bernier and Lafoy, and there's just a lot of producers that dedicate their own vineyards to their own single vineyard of Pinot Noir that is only for rosé production. They don't put that in any of their other product, and so I think you start to come across some of these really beautiful rosé. Gatinois makes Grand Cru Rosé and that's really beautiful stuff. And saignée rosés are very special from France. So I think rosé is taken to another level in Champagne. And it's probably one of the only areas in the world that sees a predominance of still red wine being blended in. You see skin, you see saignée, but you also see just red juice blended in, and that's not typical in other parts of the world, certainly in Spain and here in the US. I mean, I don't know, it's getting different. But in France, in Champagne, it's considered to be quality driven, whereas elsewhere in the world, it might consider to be not the best winemaking practice. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I'd point out too, some of these old world areas, especially, Tavel, if you are, the viticulture you practice to create a dedicated rosé is very different than what you are doing when you're just creating it as an afterthought to your red wine. So that's a huge thing. I know my little block, I deal with the canopy very differently than how I would if I was intending to grow it as a full-length red grape for a fully ripe red wine. The other thing about Europe and Italy too is just older vines, man. Rosés have that transparency, so you can get older vine speaking loudly. That sense of minerality and sort of the direct spine to it, and just there's a lot of very subtle layers that build up in there with 40, 50, 60-year-old vines that we just don't have that many of in California.
Absolutely.
There are a few special ones, like I think Bedrock's Lulu is yeah, they're few and far between. It's just, this is a younger place, so we don't have that kind of really grand history with it that Tavel and a few other places do. And I think that's important, though. I'm sure down the road we'll find more old vineyards that maybe are rehabilitated, or maybe they're not quite right for regular red wine production, but kind of converting them a little bit to rosé production could really yield some interesting benchmark results.
That's so interesting. I never mixed old vines into the equation when I'm thinking about rosé, but I think you're absolutely right.
Well, that's one of our biggest challenges here in California, even Lake County. Like, it's hard to find a grapevine that's over 25 years old in Lake County. It just, the industry is relatively young. And typically, if you have investors and they're watching everything, you pull out a vineyard at 20 to 25 years of age and replant new vines that will produce more.
Right.
Everything in Napa Valley, for the most part, is on a 20, 22-year cycle.
But old vines can be magical. I mean, I've walked in Piemonte, where the old vines produce some very expensive but very special juice.
Yeah, from the ethical point of view, I'm glad there are people out there doing what they can to preserve older vineyards. Going back to Bedrock and some of these other companies that see the inherent value in what California has left of old vines. So, I think that's important, and I think rosés show that in a way that another style of wine might not. My 2 cents.
Valuable 2 cents, my friend.
I have a question, and I may be way in over my head here. In some of the reading I'm doing, I read that in some vineyards they basically, I think this is Ian D'Agata, is probably where I picked this up. But in some of the vineyards, certainly in Italy, is they, what is the word, shall I say, that they cull the grapes in a sense, so that the grape production on the vine is different. In other words, producing a lot of grapes, they kind of thin them out to get a different is this something that is done only on older vines, or is it something you can do on younger vines in order to control the kind of wine that you want to produce from that grape? Am I being too obtuse?
Well, it's often done actually on younger vines because they're more vigorous. Older vines tend to be less vigorous, and they're more
Okay.
focused with their
Mhm.
energies. They're much more wise with them.
Right.
For some things like young Sangiovese vines, yeah, I got to go through and make sure bunches aren't touching and overlapping and getting 3 bunches per cane.
Mhm.
Dolcetto has huge 2.5-pound bunches that all want to work into each other. And you got to make some manual adjustments in there to get something that's
Mhm.
of good quality. Ideally, you do that before they have completely turned red, though. So it's not really usable for, it's more like verjus than rosé production. But I
Uh-huh.
have stories of people who go in and, because right now the grapes have just only in the last few weeks fully changed color because they're green before they turn red. But if you're doing a little bit later, you can make a really super zippy, high acid, pale red kind of thing out of it. I've heard farmers doing that. Yeah, so it is a possibility, but there's not a whole lot of phenolic maturity to those, so you're not going to get the ripe red fruits and the candy sort of black cherry notes and those things. It'll be a little more herbaceous.
Yeah, Marion, and I think the idea that behind managing the vigor in the vines, and I'm not speaking with the experience that Pietro has, but just from what I read and research, it's less about those grapes that you drop and more about what that effect has on the grapes that are still on the vine. And it's about really concentrating the vigor of that vine and as few bunches as possible is always. Yeah, Pietro, am I correct? As few bunches as possible. Not always, but can.
Yeah, it's like everything in life. It's complicated.
It also means few bottles.
Yeah. Also, then this gets into very meta sort of analysis. But at the same time, you want to make wine that you don't intervene on too much because you want the place to speak and the grapes to speak and the climate to speak.
Right.
But part of that is also not intervening with the vines too much. So you also don't want to, or I don't feel right taking a super productive vine, like say a Dolcetto vine that is just naturally very productive. I would not want to turn it into a Napa Valley bonsai 1.2 pounds per vine thing, because I think that sort of denatures the whole enterprise a little bit. So it's finding a balance and a continuum that is still has integrity with, Dolcetto should be productive. That's its nature. So I wouldn't want to choke it back so much that we're trying to make something else out of it. So, and even with pruning, each vine is a vine unto itself. One got frost damage, one had a gopher ate some of the roots, one has pruning wounds and has some vascular constrictions, and you got to treat each one as an individual and the integrity that's there without just kind of going in with an axe and trying to make everything bend to your will. So it's a sliding scale.
Yeah. And those wines are out there. Those axe-driven wines are out there where that you can clearly feel the winemaker is pushing the envelope, and what the expression in the glass is what it is. It's different. I mean,
there are lots of ways to skin it.
Pietro,
I'm sorry.
I have 2 other questions for you, Pietro. The first is the most elementary. I still don't understand what makes a rosé a rosé. It's not the grape, the color. What is? And then the second question, different, is I've had from you a different rosé, quite different from the one that we're enjoying tonight. Can you talk about that and this and the difference in the circumstances?
Yeah, I can do it briefly. The rosé is the less amount of time you have the juice and skins in contact, the lighter the color is going to be. And by association, it will pick up more or less flavor depending on the amount of time that those skins sit in the crushed grape juice. So with the rosé, you're taking the juice away from the skins at some point. The earlier you do it, the faster you do it, the less color you have. And arguably the less fruit expression also, because a lot of that fruit expression comes from compounds that are in the skin of the grape, not necessarily within the pulp of the grape. So that's sort of the baseline with rosé. You can make a rosé out of any red grape. There'll be different colors, different hues, and have different fruit profiles. But generally, you know, Merlot, Syrah, Grenache, you know, you can choose to either press it directly and get a lighter colored one and separate those skins immediately, or you can leave it on the skins for maybe up to 3 days, depending on how fast the color extracts into it, and then separate them, and then continue fermenting that juice that has the light pink color. But it's the skins that give rosé its color. So how long you leave those two things together determines the fruit and the hue of the wine ultimately. As to the other rosé, it might have been the white Zinfandel, play on white Zinfandel Bianco, we call it. But very different method than this one. The one we have today it's a saignée made from fully ripe red grapes. And there's a little bit of the Ionico portion in here that goes sort of overripe every year. So this rosé is actually a little over 15%. So it's pretty full throttle as rosés go. Whereas the other one is low alcohol. We press, I actually move all the grapes by hand from the crusher into the press and dump the tubs in directly. So it doesn't go through our terrible pump that grinds everything up. Just trying to keep as fresh and clean a style as possible by doing that and having it go through less machinery. This is the other way, where the juice sat with the skins for about a day before I drained off the portion of it that I wanted to make rosé with, and just sort of siphoned it off into another container to ferment the two different components. So the color on the Prima Materia rosé is what a red wine looks like after about 24 hours of contact with the skins. And Barbera and Ionico both have a good amount of color. So if you did the same thing with the Pinot Noir, you might have maybe a third of the color. The color of the Prima Materia rosé is about the same as a lot of low oak Pinot wine, fully red wine. So yeah.
Neil, I think you know, one of the big differentiations is you know, those rosés that we're talking hours, whereas reds we're talking days.
Typically a red fermentation is generalization.
Yeah, and also I think the character of the grapes. Rosé, you wouldn't really want to drink a rosé that doesn't have great acidity to it. And so I think, you know, growing grapes that, or selecting grapes from your portfolio that showcase a little bit more acidity, like Barbera, like Aglianico, and those grapes are going to make for a much better rosé.
I think I finally started to get it. Thank you.
Hopefully that was helpful.
And Neil, rosé was born for certainly in what was that? I have that wrong. Rosé in southern France was born out of necessity. I mean, it's warm down there, and you're next to the Mediterranean. It's beautiful, and people wanted red wine, which was the fashion way back in the day, back in the 5th, 6th century, all that. But it's too hot down there, so you wanted red wine, but you wanted it to be lighter. But you still wanted to keep the character of a red wine. So I believe that's kind of where rosé perhaps was initiated and born, was that need for character in the wine, but not being white. Because you know, when you read history of wine in various areas, and I've read a bit in my career, red wine was really prized. Red wine was really kind of the product to make when it comes to ancient viticulture. I mean, even the Champenois, before they discovered the big fault of bubbles, which was a fault for them in the beginning. Certainly for Dom Perignon, he did everything in his power to get rid of bubbles. until he discovered that bubbles were a good thing. But they were making red wines. They were trying to go after Burgundy. They were trying to hit Burgundy and get as good as they were. Yeah, born out of necessity.
Yeah.
My 2 cents. Should we talk about some wines?
Yeah.
Yeah. How many people have the, we'll start with the lightest, I think, of the 3. I think we'll save Prima Materia for the end. Certainly, if you look at it, the whole lineup, that Materia, saignée method, big, full, kind of gobsmacking feel to it. But who's got the Maffini in the glass? Anyone have Maffini?
This is the Maffini.
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. I spent the last 2 days drinking a Maffini. I don't have mine here, but I know it well. Pietro, what are your thoughts to the Luigi Maffini in the glass and also on the palate?
Man, this has some acid.
Yeah, it does.
I am impressed by that. I couldn't find a whole lot of information online with it, but it looks like they are picking. So this is Ionico base. I think it's 100% Ionico.
100%. Yeah.
In early to mid, or at least the first half of September, our Ionico is still green the second week of September. It's a very late harvesting grape, the latest in Italy probably, and it has a lot of acidity. So when I saw that date, I was wondering, first I was wondering whether or not it was just a saignée of fully ripe Ionico, and then I saw early September. It's like, oh, this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, when I tasted, I've looked around for a bit of information. I reached out to the distributor to try and get me some actual information on it. And it's a little tough, Maffini, just because I think they're young. I think they started in like 1996 or something.
Yeah.
No, it was like 2005. I'm sorry. Anyway, I think they're young. But
yeah, they seem.
I was going off of what I got on the palate. And so I get 0 presence of oak on that wine. The Maffini obviously, it hasn't gone through malolactic. It's retained its mallows. But I get no treatment on the lees, no creaminess. There's a very kind of dry, clipped, bright aromatic quality to it. But one thing I liked about that wine as it was opening was the earthiness of that wine. These kind of wild cranberries laced with this kind of volcanic earthiness. It made me think of bell pepper bruschetta and like sardines on cracker and things like that I want to have. There's something I think naked about that wine. I don't get a sense of heavy winemaking.
Yeah, I don't either. It's very sort of pure. I was going to mention, it's funny you mentioned earthy, because I think I saw that you have, you were featuring a champagne producer, not Coudier. Who do you have in your lineup right now?
La Herte Frere?
No, it's a different one. There's a champagne producer. I thought I saw that maybe you have a bottle, and it's would be classified as an earthy champagne.
Okay.
And I remember the first time I tried it, because it was like nothing but dust and spider webs, like old basement in a good way. Like there's just so little fruit
Not in the basement.
but it has all this expressive, mineral tones and like mushroom ash and just these things. Like I'm struggling with descriptors for it, because it's not like bright, baked pear fruit. This reminded me of that a little bit, sort of singing in the middle, but not, the fruit is there. It has that, pretty cranberry, sort of very, not a lower ripeness, fruitiness to it, but yeah, it's more about the mineral and the earth and the tactile, you get sort of some volcanic soil, the buzzing energy to it. So it's not a fancy rosé, but I think it's a really interesting, food-friendly rosé of place.
Yeah,
rosé of clarity.
Food is key. Food is key with this rosé.
Yeah.
They make a tomato down in Campania called the Pignolo tomatoes. You come across these, Pietro? They're these little tomatoes, and they're they're from like Mount Vesuvius, and they're like, they taste earthy to them. And all I want is that on some fettuccine when I have that particular rosé. Yeah, and you know, I recall in our last discussion, and I'm not sure, Kevin, I think we talked a little bit about acidity and kind of the different, I don't know, expressions of acidity that showcase themselves in the glass. And I might be wrong; it could have been somebody else. But you know, I think that certainly of all the three, the Maffini has this, and I'm surprised they were able to capture this in Campagna. But it's like biting into an apple. It's very crisp, like pithy, aromatic, like just a very kind of clipped, bright acidity that makes your tongue kind of seize up just a little bit. Whereas if with the Maduria one in your wine, the acidity is a little bit softer and a little bit easier on the palate. And for me, the difference between the two is a meal and on its own. You know, I want a meal with the first one with that bright clipped, you know, that torturing your tongue acidity, and with the other ones that are a little bit broader and more open and softer, you know, I want to drink those kind of on their own. Those are a little more pleasing.
Okay, so I just have to tell you that Dana made vegetables to go with this tonight, and there's mushrooms and onions and zucchini and carrots with a little salt and pepper and olive oil that she roasted, and it goes beautifully with this. It really does. I mean, the wine just opens up with the flavor of those vegetables. It's perfect.
Yeah. I'm glad you had that. That's awesome, Dana. Nice move. Nice moves, Dana.
I mean, it's exactly what you guys were just talking about. It's perfect. It's like, oh yeah, you should.
It's funny because we were just saying when Pietro said about the acidity, we're like, well, what the hell does acidity mean? I think we missed it on the last Zoom. We've been drinking too much.
So we Googled it, and we were.
So thank you for clarifying.
And then you guys talked about it.
Now I can actually taste it and have a better brain.
And remember, you know, Dana, acidity is one of the 4 major components of wine when it comes to experiencing it and judging it and trying to figure out what's in the glass. For me as a somm and working in a restaurant, when I would arrive, especially in New York, and do my setup procedures, you know, I'd be, you know, presented with, you know, maybe 9 different new menu items in the restaurants that I worked at. And you know, half of them would be prepared in front of us. And I'd be part of a small crew of sommeliers, about 6 or 7 of us. And that's big that's a lot of sommeliers for a restaurant. And we would pull a bunch of wines and taste, and really, like, when you're in a kitchen and like vents are going off, and like you're usually next to the garmicher, which is the person that makes antipasti and stuff and soups and salads. So there's always like odd smells and stuff. You're just focusing on alcohol, tannin, sugar, which I just call dryness, and acidity. And of those 4, acidity is mouth-watering, refreshing. And the best way to measure acidity, Dana, do you have wine in the glass right now?
I do.
You better. Take a sip of wine, swish it around your palate a little bit.
Okay.
Swallow, but the moment that wine gets in, you know, leaves your mouth, leave your mouth open and put your tip of your tongue to the roof of the mouth, and just wait and see what happens inside your mouth. And I know this is like rudimentaries, you know, sometimes acidity should just be, you know, perfectly straightforward, but I'll tell you, wine's a sensory experience, and going back to basics is the most important thing when it comes to enjoying wine. So this, like, and just leave your mouth open and not do nothing. And you feel the saliva start to build, kind of pour out of your mouth. That's acidity. That's it.
Thank you.
And it's the key. It's the key to good pairing sometimes, because that can often temper spice. You know, it can relax really spicy food. It can relax fish oil. Right? Acidity can do a lot of fun stuff when it comes to food and wine. But that's acidity. It's a good way to measure it. Yeah, you're welcome, of course. And the further you get to warmer climates, the less acidity you're going to encounter in wines. Pietro and I like rosés that have firm acidity, that are bright and clean. So we always look to alpine climates.
Cool.
Yeah. Any other thoughts about Maffini?
Mm.
Clean and crisp. Shall we move to the Produttore? Cool. Does anyone want to take us off? Talk a little bit about the color and the flavor, and a little bit about the aroma.
Mm. Oh,
Strawberry and apple. I smell a lot of apple.
Amy, what's the state of that apple?
you're
Who
muted.
said that? Was that Dana?
No, I smell strawberries.
Oh, you saw
You're
strawberry.
muted.
Hold on, we'll get to strawberries in just a second. Dana, what's the state of that apple? Is that still on the tree? Is it full of color? Is it still green, or is it fallen down on the ground and gotten maybe stomped on by a mule?
What do you think? I don't know.
Feels a little bit more generous. I think it's a pretty ripe apple. I feel like
Yeah.
it is, right? The fruit's pretty strong. It's almost like someone's made a jelly out of it a little bit.
Yeah, there's more fruit.
Yeah. Dana, I get strawberry too.
Thank God.
What's the state of those strawberries, Dana? Did you pick them off the bush yesterday, or are they like almost ready to be like spread over a bit of toast? Get your nose in there. Don't think about it.
Okay.
I'm getting wet earth.
I just feel like they're kind of at their perfect
It's not that wine though.
period.
Perfect ripeness.
Yeah.
The way that you're like little strawberries, when they're perfectly ripe, they're like a little sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else agree? Disagree?
Oh, this is the Aka. No?
That's the Prima Materia.
The one from Maduria, the Aka. To me, I also get strawberries, but for me, the strawberries are almost like in the syrup that you get when you go to like an ice cream place, and you get like strawberries and syrup. To me, it's got a very kind of a sweet nose, but that's just me.
Yes.
That's just what I'm getting. I think what I'm driving at is climate.
Different.
Yeah, I'm driving at an area that's warmer. Certainly a little bit warmer from Cilento and in Campania, where the first wine comes from. Here, we're facing the Ionian Mediterranean, and it's a very hot area down in Apulia. Pietro, you've spent some time in Apulia, yeah?
Yeah, but it was in the winter.
Darn it!
Yeah.
But Apulia is hot. I mean, it's a hot place.
Yeah, you can tell by looking at it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when I'm engaging with what's in the glass, folks, and trying to like figure out the aroma and like what's speaking to me, I try and latch onto a fruit that makes sense, but then I try and figure out what's the state of it. And for me, the fruits in this glass are very mature, dark, fuller, really almost to the point of being sweet. Perhaps almost to a little bit at the point of being cooked into a jam. And for a rosé, that tells me this is from a warm climate. This is from an area that's got perhaps a little bit less acidity in the glass than the Maffini. This one's got a lot of fruit expression to it. A lot juicier. Yeah, I just want to drink this one on its own. Any thoughts about this wine?
I like it.
You like it?
If you like it, you like it.
It's my favorite one.
It's your favorite one. Yeah, it's pretty juicy. Right?
It's just an easy drinker,
Yeah, it really is. It's plush, soft. Yeah. This is this particular wine is an example, and there are a couple of these examples in Italy. In Piemonte, it's the Produttore di Barbaresco. In Alto Adige, it's the Cantin Terlan. Co-op and others. Down in Manduria, it's the Produttore di Manduria. And Manduria is in kind of the northern part of Apulia, if you were to look at it. This is a organization of about 400 different small producers who basically give their harvest to a single co-op, single winemaker who takes these grapes and makes beautiful wine out of them. And the best of these co-ops are everywhere, but there are very few that adhere to strict standards. There are very few that will only accept small farms of upwards of 2.5 hectare only. So what's that? 5, 6, 7 acres, something like that. So we're talking small farms that are growing Primitivo. This co-op, method was born just because everyone grew grapes in Italy. I mean, I talked to my friends I worked in restaurants and their parents grew grapes next to the eggplant, next to the so on and so forth. So grapes were, I think, prominent in everyone's life in Italy. But yeah, anyway, I don't want to take over too much.
This is a very interesting aspect of the whole Italian wine production. I think this aspect of co-ops. And I recall we were doing whites, and is it Cincinnatus? Isn't that a co-op? We had a white, not recently.
I'm not
that I got from you.
It could be white you got from me from a co-op.
And it was called Cincinnatus or Cincinnate. I'll look it up.
From me.
But again, I looked it up and it was a co-op.
The co-op as well.
And
yeah.
And I just like the Produttore. I just think this is fascinating.
Yeah. But Mary, there's a lot of co-ops out there, and I think many of them are really just about getting wine to the trattorias and the enotecas and the places all over Italy. But I think there are a few co-ops like the Produttore di Barbaresco, and we're talking about a co-op in Barbaresco in Piedmont,
right,
northwestern Italy, and they began in the 1890 something. And then re-began in 1958. But anyway, they're a very historic and important co-op because they require 100% harvest from their members. So every single grape that they grow, so members can't hold back the best grapes for their own wine. Everything has to go to the Produttore. They pay a single price per kilo of grapes across the board. They have a bonus system that's tiered, so the better quality grapes might enter into the next tier and the next tier, and all that information is posted in the town square every year. And that's just a couple of the rules that the Produttore abides by. But I'll tell you, it brings quality right across the board and it raises it.
Yeah.
I did spend a little bit of time in Manduria, and when we went out to the vineyards, it was a lot like Burgundy, where everybody has 200 vines, 300 vines. Son is subdividing into 150 vines here and 150 vines for the brother. It's a patchwork of little tiny micro vineyard sites.
Wow.
It really makes sense to have a co-op in that area. Oh, and I was going to mention, I actually did, when we went down there, I got to do a guest chef afternoon at the co-op with their resident chef. Forget what I did. It's like chestnut pork. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a little bit nerve-wracking. My Italian's not that good, but we pulled it off. But underneath the main area, they actually have in the basement is a museum, the history of winemaking in Apulia, with dioramas and ancient implements and presses and pruning equipment. Really interesting place. And the whole time people are coming in with their 5-gallon jugs to load up the diesel. It's a pump that meters it out by the liter as it goes.
Yep.
It's like filling up your car, except you're filling up the wagon.
I love it.
Yeah, really a neat place.
I hear there's a fountain somewhere in southern Italy that now just produces wine, or doesn't produce wine, but it's a wine fountain in some square in southern Italy, and it's just wine nonstop. A digression. I apologize.
I don't know what to do.
Good. All right. Shall we move to your wine, Pietro? I'm going to pop up some maps. You want to talk a little bit about where you're getting these grapes from, and what your thoughts were behind this particular rosé? One of three, which is intense.
Yeah, one of three. This one's kind of the outlier of those three. But if you weren't around last week, so we're up in Lake County, just north of Napa, located in between the same Mayacamas and the run out of the Vaca Mountains. We do have a resident volcano about 2 miles away from the vineyard as well, which is sort of a third geological force. We're about 2 miles from that Clear Lake area. We're just in that sort of western armpit, the Kelsey Bench area. And we're at about 1,500 feet of elevation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so even though
That's
it's
much higher up.
yeah, the lake level is about 1,300 feet. So it looks like you're at sea level, but you're actually already up a little ways. So pretty warm in the summer. We get a lot of sunlight, especially when there's no smoke. And then it freezes pretty hard every winter, partially because of that altitude. So we have a couple of different factors working. And fairly volcanic soils up there, since we're in between the two mountain ranges. 14 different grapes planted on it. But this rosé was just sort of a end of season thought. Our Barbera and Ionico are two of the last things that we pick in the year, usually the end of October, sometimes as late as November. And there's a little part of the Ionico vineyard that really, they're young vines and they're on really rocky soil, and they tend not to, they kind of become very ripe before they feel like they're coming into balance. Still struggling with that little bit, but I decided to keep that little block separate and bleed off some Barbera about a day after we picked it. And then I did the same thing with that Ionico juice. So the alcohol, instead of being an early picked rosé, which is one of the types we make, this would be a late picked rosé. So the alcohol on it's actually 15%. So it's kind of a full throttle thing. The kind of the third force in it though is that both of those grapes have naturally pretty high acidity. So even though this is end of the season, pretty high sugar and pretty good ripeness, they still naturally have a good amount of acid to them, which I thought would be an interesting kind of full bore attempt to see what we get. And this spent 6-7 months in neutral barrels. Both of these grapes are ones that like to have a lot of oxygen. Just Barbera, we discussed a couple of weeks ago, it kind of eats up a lot of oxygen early in its life, and Ionico is the same way. So I had to put these in barrels because I was trying to keep them in stainless steel for a little bit, and they were getting just, it wasn't happy. There's still a little bit of tannin in there. It was just needing more oxygen than stainless could give it. So moved it to neutral barrels where it stayed for 7 months before bottling it just about 2 months ago. And this did not complete the malolactic fermentation, which is the second one that most red grapes go through. So you'll get a little bit of almost on the back of the palate, like a green apple granular acidity sense. The main acid in red grapes is tartaric acid, which you kind of get on the tongue, like that, the second it hits the tip of your tongue, you can really feel it. But the malic acid is a little bit farther back on the palate. And you can tell when there are different ways that you can keep that in the grapes. This has not been filtered. So this just occurred naturally, that it didn't finish that secondary fermentation. So yeah, just kind of a fun experiment kind of a nod to the darker colored rosés of southern Italy, but within a kind of a weird experimental California framework.
You know, Pietro, I have a question for you. Between your wine and, let's say, the Maffini, you know, your wine has these really kind of vibrant, almost candied-like fruit, you know, aromas to them, and a very kind of a plush palate, but that kind of really candied, almost like a bubble gum, not quite bubble gum, but almost getting up there. Whereas the Maffini is a much cleaner, kind of more polished fruit, and more like those crushed minerals, like crushed stones in a brook or something. Apart from climate, what happens in the winery that pulls out maybe fermentation, temperature, and time, that pulls out those bubble gum kind of aromas versus, you know, the other style? Because you certainly don't have that in your White Zinfandel.
Yeah, I associate the bubblegumness with the ripeness of the grapes. And I've made Sangiovese rosé. I do make a Sangiovese based rosé. That's the third one that's in between the two styles. And if I pick it too late, it goes bubblegum. If I pick it where I like it, then it's strawberry, black pepper, and more sort of articulated savory elements. But it can become bubblegum if it gets a little too much California sunshine.
Okay, so that's in the vineyard.
So I think that's mainly when you decide to pick.
For some reason, I thought it had to do with the temperature of fermentation.
Oh, well, it can also be a yeast and low temperature thing as well.
Cool
you can
temperature,
get more
right?
esters.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not using that in this. Like, this isn't cultured yeast or anything like that, which is part of why I didn't do that secondary fermentation. This is kind of loose and iterative, but it's like, yeah, good, a good pairing there.
No, cool. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, there are a couple different ways you can get that. You can do super temperature controlled and, you know, very high tech winemaking, and you can really draw out that sort of bubblegum, estery kind of thing as well.
Ester feel kind of thing.
Yeah, and those because they spent time in barrel, this had more of that, but then they kind of burned off through the oak.
Okay, even in neutral oak.
Yeah, it's when they get a little bit of oxygen, they start complexing into different compounds.
Right.
So if this had only been in stainless steel, it would probably have some of that. But my feeling is that it would have been a little bit stinky. So you'd have bubblegum and stinky together.
Yeah, that's good. Not to stink bubblegum.
Something.
I think it's so interesting, you know, and folks, just for me, a takeaway is that so much is linked to place, to climate. And certainly if you're going to a restaurant, I mean, let's go to a restaurant now, but it's hard to figure out what you want to buy, especially if you go to a retail store and you're looking kind of, what do I want to drink? What do I favor? And typically the owner of that retail store, hopefully they're there and they know their wines. They should. And you can talk about climate, you know, cooler climates, more pronounced acidity, firmer fruit flavors, maybe more razor sharp, cleaner, focused. And then the warmer climates, like the Primitivo di Maduria, where it's just more relaxed and more plump and more wide, less vertical expression, more horizontal. And you can kind of pick your palate, pick your place, pick your meal based off of that. Just wanted to make that little connection, because little connections like that, I think, can lead us to the right bottle, which is important.
Yeah.
Question about when you're making wine. Like, how often, it sounds like you taste it sort of regularly.
Yes, you got it.
Yeah, so how often are you doing that? Like, I never really realized that people were like sitting there going, oh, this is doing this, let's do this.
During the winemaking process?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, constantly. Many times, if it's something that's that I'm worried about, or something that's a new 3-4 times a day, because it can change every few hours. If it's something that's a little more like the Barbera, you know, I've been making that for a while. It's pretty predictable. It's pretty linear. There's not a whole lot of tannin to worry about. And then I'll pull a sample out of the tank every morning. I kind of know where that one's going. Something like Sangiovese is much more, you got to be on it. There's a lot of tannin, there's a lot of acid, you're trying to balance things. And you just kind of learn over time that, it's a little too tannic now, but after 2 years in barrel, it'll be just right. So there's a lot of sort of seeing into the future that it's hard to explain, but you just have to do it and kind of accumulate that knowledge. It's like cooking is the same thing. The difference between a 4-hour braise and a 12-hour braise, you lose some things, you gain some other things. It depends on what you're hoping, what the end goal is.
It's pretty cool.
Pietro, what's your like, what grape keeps you up at night?
Sagrantino, Refosco.
I knew it was Sagrantino.
Yeah, for multiple reasons. Mainly just alcohol versus tannin on that one.
Yeah.
And Refosco, I'm not sure that I understand what it wants to do in our location. I don't understand it yet. So that keeps me up.
It's a strange little grape. Have you ever thought about Teraldigo?
Yeah, actually.
I feel like that's I've tasted some Refoscos, but I don't know. They go from cola to flat cola. But I mean, Teraldigo, I've come across some awesome Teraldigos. Teraldigo is a native grape of northeastern Italy, in the areas of Trentino and Friuli. Trentino native, but also plays in Friuli and the Veneto in a big way. Sorry, go ahead.
But oddly, it can take some heat. It actually, it can do well in some California climates.
Oh, I've never tasted a Teraldigo from California.
Paul,
I've had a couple not so great ones from Central Valley, but there are a couple producers. Somebody in Dry Creek, I can't remember the name. They have one. It's actually quite good, and there's some actually good Sagrantino out there now as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside of Healdsburg,
we'll be tasting one.
Yeah.
Pietro, how many different kinds of grapes are you growing?
14.
14.
Yeah,
okay.
14. Yeah. Some things are just 100 vines. Like I have 100 Grenache, 100 Franc, 100 Petit Syrah. But the other 11 are all Italian varietals. So yeah, each one has its own complex that it gives.
Yeah.
So.
Do you have a favorite grape?
If I had to drink one Italian grape every day, it would probably be Sangiovese.
Okay.
I agree. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it hits all those, we can't do Pinot. We're too warm for it. It's too challenging. Sangiovese is kind of on the same spectrum, but in a more robust framework.
Yeah. So, interesting. Wow.
At least that's my thought on it. But other things are great too. Grenache, I wish I had more Cab Franc. I'd like to be playing with that more.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I had more Negro Amaro so we could make some really wacky, weird Negro Amaro rosé.
Oh, wow.
Rosés.
Wow.
That's one that I would really like to dedicate some to rosé, but we just don't have that much, and it's doing pretty well. So, got to put the production where it sells.
Paul knows that I kind of have a thing for these funny little grapes from different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I just finished it off. It was one I had never come across until I met Paul. Is a Cesanese from outside Rome. Boy, I just finished that off the other night. I really like that.
Yeah, that's one that just came across my radar a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I'm glad to see that that's a recently rescued outlier.
We need more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Funny, you say Cesanese, it makes me think Cabernet Franc sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, I could see that.
I gotta say, man, I think your wine is singing right now. For me, my particular style is more the Maffini, but I think just to put all three glasses up against each other, I think the Prima Materia is showcasing the most complexity
I'm enjoying it.
They probably all have it. I don't have the middle one, but I'm sure the personality is unique.
They're all different, yeah. But yeah, I think saignée is really something else. Good saignée, folks. If you like this Prima Materia style rosé, saignée. If you like bubbles, I urge you. It's going to cost you like an extra $30 on top of a $50 is what champagne costs. But if you're willing to do it, boy, it is a special experience.
How do you spell saignée?
Saignee, and there's a little accent aigu over the first E.
Oh, I almost got it. Okay.
Good.
Saignée. Okay. Got it. Mm-hmm.
Saignée.
Well, I would be happy to continue drinking all three of these, I must say.
They're all winners. Yeah.
They're all winners in their way.
They're tasty, aren't they?
Yeah. I'm really enjoying the whole thing.
Yeah. Rosé
I've
is
never
really unique.
enjoyed rosé until I got to California. I never had to think critically about it before in my career as a sommelier. It's like if they say you want rosé, it's like, okay,
I got
here,
one in
here's
the
some
back.
rosé. You know, I don't like think about appellation and expression as much, but man, rosé is good in the warm. Cool. Any other thoughts about these wines? Can we go around and say what our wine of the night was? We didn't do that last time. It's something I like to do in tastings, where everyone says which wine was spoke to you the most. It doesn't have to be a wine that you liked the most, but which one spoke to you the most. Sometimes a wine of the night can be one that challenged you. Might not be one that you want to take home with you, but a one that challenged you. So let's go around. Who wants to start? Kevin, can we start with your crew?
Sure, yeah. People that were like the first one. And then we also have a couple we really like. We did notice that this one really seemed to change. Flavor changed significantly.
The one in the middle changes?
That's one.
The Madure one?
Number 2.
Cool. Oh, great. And I think you broke up a little bit there, but I think you said the first one you liked?
And the 3rd.
Yes,
And
the
the
first
third.
one.
First and the third. Got it. Cool. Great. Who's next? Dana? Bring it on. I like the low lighting mode. You guys have we moved into red wine?
It's the smoke.
No, everybody has to smoke. I think when I started, I was really drawn to the strawberry one, the second one.
Okay.
Like that was pretty striking for me. But as the evening has worn on, don't do that. Oh, I unplugged it. As the evening has worn on, sorry, I am tending to like as a sort of, I guess, the longer drinker is the Prima Materia.
Yeah, kind of can follow the evening into night a little bit more.
Yeah.
Very cool. Mary, what are your thoughts?
Enjoyed them all, and
Cool. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait. The rest of you. Hold on 1 second, Mary.
Well,
What about the rest of you there?
I'm sorry. Yep.
Sorry, and Kevin, I didn't catch the other two in your group as well. I apologize. I'm just jumping around.
Yes, my daughter Tess actually was upset that I didn't call the. She really likes that one.
Gotcha. Yaka. Sounds good. Cool.
We have a diverse group of favorites. All the bottles are represented.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And Dana, what about the ones in the background? That's right. Come forward.
I'm
gonna stay where I am. I'm good.
So Alex, my husband, likes the Prima Materia mostly because it's closest to what he enjoys, which is a redder wine. He's not much for white wines or even light colored. So that's closest for him. And then I really enjoyed the second one, the Puglia wine. But I'm as Dana said, kind of moving into the evening. This one, the third one, the Prima Materia, also is really nice. And I keep thinking that I would like to have this with barbecue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that weird?
No.
Barbecue would totally overpower, but it just seems like it's light enough and crisp enough to be something that would relate really well.
What's your name?
Suzanne.
Suzanne, let me tell you, not every wine pairing has to be a wine pairing. And I learned that early on. Like sometimes a wine, it just needs to, sometimes if it just cleans the palate, it's done its job. It doesn't need to magically sit next to the textures and the aromas and clean the salt, but aromatize the rose water. None of that bullshit. Sometimes like just a nice, clean, refreshing wine to like clean away like barbecue sauce and like corn stuck in your teeth.
I don't even eat barbecue very often, but I really kind of crave it with this wine.
Yeah, embrace that. I love it. I love it. That's a good pairing. To me, that's a successful pairing.
Great barbecue.
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta Pietro. You gotta figure out an actual pairing now. What barbecue item would you have with this? Not right now on the spot, but just something to mull over.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Social media. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Mary, I apologize. Give us your wine of the night, my dear.
Well, all of them. I think they all have a place in the pantheon.
Good. Give me one.
I think though, if you want me to do a 1, 2, 3, I am really enjoying Pietro's wine.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure I would. It's a blend, and I'm obsessed with the single varietal.
Yep.
But I am really enjoying it with a lovely Roman sheep cheese.
Mm.
And then I think I like the Primitivo.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also enjoyed the Aglianico. They all have their place. But for tonight, Pietro.
Oh, thank you.
First place.
Too kind.
I'm really enjoying it. Thank
Mary,
you.
is that Roman cheese? Is it firm or is it spreadable?
It's soft. It's soft.
It's soft.
Semi-spreadable. Yeah, it squishes.
Semi-spreadable.
It squishes.
Okay.
It squishes.
Reminds me of cachota. Okay.
Yeah.
Great, Amy and Daniel.
But, yeah.
Bring us home.
Yeah.
Just you have to shout.
Oh, I really thought the number 2 was gonna win it for me, but as number 3 opened up, it definitely. I think they both have very different purposes. I think that I'd be interested in having number 3 with dinner, but maybe starting with number 2 in the backyard, like it says on the the pairing sheet that was sent with. I don't think the number 1 matched my interest in smell, which was very interesting, but it might also be the most memorable out of the 3. Like I got a lot of that acidity on the palate, or on the nose, and that makes it really memorable, but maybe not as interesting to taste.
Great feedback. Excellent. Daniel, top that.
Yeah. I'm a little confused on the numbers. The Prima Materia really stood out for me because it seemed more red on the spectrum, and that was kind of a question I came to this with. I've been having a couple rosés lately, and they always just skew toward white. They're like white in character, and they're just like there's some little thing there, and this is more like kind of coming from the other side. And it was a surprise to me to experience that because it's just not like others. No. So that's really that's what stood out to me. And then otherwise, it also just has such an amazing smell. The nose is really like I smelled all three of them, and every time I smelled this one, it was just like I kind of wanted to keep going at it. You know, it smells like Jolly Ranchers. It's got this like you guys said bubble gum, but I think of like just candy or something, hard candy, and it made me want to just kind of go in deeper. I really liked it.
Yeah, Daniel, I think you've discovered a wine, but you've also might have discovered a production method that you favor, which is the saignée, that method of bleeding grapes. And yeah, we'll be talking. Cool. Pietro, without any naked bias at all, what was your favorite wine of the night?
Oh, I like the Maffini. I always like whatever is the opposite of what I do.
Nice.
And for me, the Maffini, going back to an earlier comment I made, I feel like it shows an interesting face of Ionico that I might not have seen otherwise. Sort of a more naked presentation of it. So I enjoy that. It's pure. It may not be the most like hedonistically pleasurable of the three, but I find it interesting, really interesting.
I agree.
In its purity. So
there's a lot of there's some complexity to the Maffini, and for me, the Maffini room temperature was just right. It was just right. It's a little chill to it, but not much. Yeah. Those cold temperatures can sometimes mask things that you.
And I will say, since I mentioned just breathing and air, rosé is not quite like red wine, since you have those anthocyanins and other things in there. A lot of rosés do actually need air to sort of heat up and start moving in a way that white wines don't. So as far as just in my experience, especially if they're made kind of reductively and are, it seems to me like the darker they are, the more air they need. And there's this tendency to, we're shielding them away from air. We're not making them like a red wine with lots of air in the process, trying to soften the tannins. Right. So generally with darker rosés, I will want to open them 20, 30 minutes before I'm ready to drink them.
Oh, I never thought of that.
I don't know if that's true. That could just be my...
No, I think if that works for you, that there's some validity there. Kevin had asked me that a very similar question to that at the beginning. And for me, I find that rosés are made to be drunk fresh and young and as is. But I actually, when I was answering that, I was thinking more about vintage age and less about actual pulling the cork and letting it breathe in the glass a little bit. And I think although I'm hard pressed to come across an Italian wine that I wouldn't decant. I love these little decanters. They're my favorite because this is it's small enough where I often will decant a white wine. An Italian white, Falanghina to Roero Alnese, just to give it a moment to kind of breathe a little bit. So Kevin, I stand half corrected there a bit. I think Pietro, the darker the color of the rosé, the more time you like to give it in the glass.
Roughly, possibly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Cool. I've had one rosé champagne that I decanted tableside in a crystal decanter, and I remember tasting it. I remember that improved it so much, which doesn't make sense to me because it's a bubbly and it's champagne, but it really spoke, and it was an older style saignée method. I forget who the producer was years ago.
Sometimes that stuff spends 5 years in barrel. It's crazy.
It's true.
Amazing.
Cool.
I still don't understand the world of champagne.
The world of champagne, it's something that I think we can study until we're old. There are a lot of...
you missed Paul's champagne class.
Oh,
you missed Paul's champagne class. It was one of the highlights of my life.
We'll have to do another one.
It was a lot of champagne. I do 11. So we
it was a lot. It was good. It was good.
It was good. It was a lot of champagne. But we tasted all the styles. So Blanc de Blanc, Blanc de Noir. We tasted Pinot Meunier on its own. We tasted this Special Club. We tasted 2 Tête de Cuvées. We tasted Saignée Method Rosé. And we tasted Krug Grand Cuvée, which is, you know, a little more mature, a little more opulent style. And the Special Club was, I think, from 2009. I think it was Gimonet. Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
That was good. God willing, we will do it again one day.
We will. Champagne, you know, sparkling is so special, especially in Champagne. And I think just to speak to what Pietro was talking about a little bit about, you know, not quite getting it. And I don't think I'm ever going to quite get it. But the magic in Champagne is very often what goes on inside that bottle once it's been corked, foil, or cork, you know, and the cage and foil and all that stuff. It's that slow breakdown of yeast cells called autolysis. And we just don't know what happens inside that bottle, but we do know that after X amount of time, the breakdown of those dead yeast cells will produce aromas that you'll never forget. I think of 88 Krug, and I'll never forget the taste of that champagne on my palate. And I was tasting it after I brushed my teeth that night. I was sitting in bed tasting it on my lips. That stuck around. But it's that magical process that happens inside that bottle after 2, 3, 5, 10, 15 years. It's incredible. But you just don't know. It's you can't track it. Yeah. Pietro, would you ever get into sparkling wine? Certainly not where you are.
I would love to. That would be a whole other. Yeah, it's one of those things. Like when I was a chef, I'm convinced that knowing how to do 1,000 banquet meals makes you better at doing one tasting.
Yep.
I think the precision and long sight of sparkling winemaking is it would be a whole new set of tools to be able to use in red winemaking. Just having that additional area of knowledge. So I would love to do it at some point. I don't even know how to approach it, or you know, maybe I can find somebody to partner up with on a project. But yeah, I would love to take that direction at some point.
I think Salos said it was about it's really all about making a really good base wine. You just add the sparkle.
That makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. This was really fun.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's lovely.
Great conversation. I just want to raise a glass to Pietro. I think his wine absolutely took the night for a
Very
second.
nice.
Oh, this is really, really good stuff. So salud.
Salud.
Thank you all for coming.
Hello.
We will have, please follow us on social media and all that good stuff, because we're going to be ramping up Sangiovese, a very special discussion.
All right.
Really excited for that one. We're going to be fitting Pietro's wine next to Sangiovese Grosso from Montalcino, next to Prugnolo Gentile from Montepulciano, and next to Sangiovetto from Chianti Classico.
Oh, nice.
Very nice. Wonderful.
That's a good set.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Sounds good.
So it's all Sangiovese all night. It might be a 4-pack. Sounds like it's going to
Oh
be.
my God.
Oh my God.
Are you up to it?
Oh,
Oh, right.
Tell your friends.
I'm glad I got friends.
Thank you, Mary.
Down to a T.
Ciao, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a lovely
Thank you.
weekend, and we'll
Thank
see
you,
you in
Paul,
2 weeks.
Pietro, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
bye.